Our litigation, our investigations of voter rolls have led to the removal of well over 4 million names from the voting list. Dirty names from the voting list in just the last 2.5 years or so. We also have some more great news in the area of election integrity. It was a federal court ruling in Maryland that struck as unlawful and contrary to federal law a rule that essentially criminalized using voter registration lists to investigate voter fraud. Yes, that's what they tried to do in Maryland. Maryland is a state controlled by the left. We've already been fighting in Maryland, or fought in Maryland, on that very issue in some respects, because early on, well, let me get into it. So there's a group of voters who challenged this regulation and took it to federal court because they didn't want to agree to access the voter rolls with this restriction in place. And plus they had liability if a state board of elections bureaucrat decided, oh, they were investigating voter fraud. So they sued in federal court, and the federal court agreed with them. And they agreed with them in large measure thanks to a case that Judicial Watch had previously brought in Maryland on voter access to voter registration lists. And our amicus brief, a friend of court brief that we followed or filed in this case. District Court Judge Matthew J. Maddox of the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland struck down a Maryland State Board of Elections regulation that restricted and criminalized the use of voter registration lists for voter fraud and other investigations. Citing a separate Judicial Watch court victory in Maryland that opened up voter rolls to public scrutiny under federal law, the court recognized that restricting the use of state voters' rolls presented an obstacle to upholding federal voter roll maintenance as required by the National Voter Registration Act. Now that's the federal law that requires states to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. How is it you can figure out if they're taking reasonable steps to clean up the rolls if you can't look at the rolls? That's why there's a portion of the law that guarantees access to the rolls. And they're trying to restrict access in a way that makes it impossible to use them effectively, and would stop Judicial Watch from doing it if it was implemented not only in Maryland but in other states. So it's an important court ruling. Had some material I wanted to read from it. Let's see if I can get to it. In Judicial Watch's National Voter Registration Act request, the statewide voter registration list is almost always the first record required, with fields including the voter's name, address, date of birth, voter status, and the last 5 years of voting history. Judicial Watch uses the records obtained through the public inspection provision of the National Voter Registration Act, along with data from the Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal agency, and the U.S. Census Bureau, to determine whether state governmental officials are in compliance with the law. This is information critical to our pre-suit evaluation of whether a jurisdiction is potentially violating the law requiring list maintenance and whether there is a meritorious claim. And this was the big case that we filed as it related to this issue in Maryland, where they had these restrictions. I think they prevented non-Maryland citizens from looking at the list. At least that was the rule that we were challenging. And the federal court ruled, organizations such as Judicial Watch have the resources and expertise that few individuals can marshal. By excluding these organizations from access to the voter registration lists, the state law undermines Section 8I's efficacy. And Section 8I is the section of the law that requires access to information, including voter roll information, about how states are maintaining the rolls. And by the way, it's a rule and a law that you can invoke when you ask your county or state officials for records as to whether they're keeping up with list maintenance as law requires. The law does not require perfect voting lists. It does require the states to take reasonable steps to make sure they're accurate. And the basic reasonable steps upheld by the Supreme Court include, if you don't show up to vote, let's say you don't vote in a federal election, they're supposed to send you a card. Simple postcard. Hey, you didn't vote. Are you still there? Let us know. If you don't respond to the card, or you don't vote in the next 2 federal elections, so that's 4 years in total. I mean, we're talking potentially 5 years in total. They must remove your name from the rolls. But the rolls show other potential issues related to elections. And the left knows that. That's why they don't like people looking at them. Now, there's a lot of information in there, right? The home addresses and things like that. Judicial Watch gets this data. We don't start posting people's home addresses. There's no need to do that. We're not insane. And of course, if we started doing that and harassing voters, there'd be laws we'd be violating. We were just trying to make sure the lists are accurate. And we know what we're doing. Heck, I almost broke my cup. Our litigation, our investigations of voter rolls have led to the removal of well over 4 million names from the voting list. Dirty names from the voting list in just the last 2.5 years or so. And we've got ongoing litigation to clean up millions more. This is what the judge found. And by the way, I want to commend the voter group and individuals who fought this. I spoke to a group of Republicans this week, and David Marshberger was one of the plaintiffs, and I met the other plaintiff. I think I met her, Catherine Sullivan. And they stood up against this lawlessness. They wanted the voter list, and they told David he had to sign off on this restriction. And what David did was he crossed it out and said, I'm signing it, but I'm crossing out this restriction. I'm not agreeing to it. And it ended up in federal court. That's what I like to see. Citizens standing up for their rights under law. It's great. And he won. He took on City Hall and won, or in this case, the state government and won. And to the degree we contributed, we're so excited. We're so excited for these citizen activists. And it shows you don't need to be Judicial Watch to get things done, dear citizens. You can do it on your own, and I encourage you to do that with your own sets of activists in the various states. And there was another ruling in Maine, similar, where Maine was restricting access to voter rolls. And I believe Judicial Watch filed an amicus there, our friends at the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Again, got a court to open up the voter rolls. The use restriction presents a clear and substantial risk of chilling and deterring individuals from seeking to access information subject to disclosure under the National Voter Registration Act, when the individual expects to identify past infractions as part of a broader effort to identify error and fraud in the preparation and maintenance of voter rolls. What legitimate interest the state of Maryland has in the use restriction, i.e. preventing voter harassment, may be satisfied by state laws against harassment and trespass. So they found that the use restriction essentially, as Judicial Watch recommended they do, prevents an unlawful impediment to the National Voter Registration Act, the federal law. State law loses against, or in this case the regulation loses against the federal law. It's preempted by it. It's great stuff. Great victory. In Illinois, we had sued. Illinois, you technically could access the rolls, but you had to drive down to Springfield. So the capital of Illinois is south of Chicago. It's about I think it's a 2-hour drive. And you could look at the list of voters one at a time on a computer terminal. I mean, that's ridiculous. So we sued and successfully opened up the Illinois voter rolls there. That's what I love about these cases. I'm reminded of all the good work that we're doing. It's even, sometimes I forget how much work we do in a particular area. It's just great work. So nice victory for Marylanders. And frankly, it sends a national message. Stop messing with voters who want to secure their elections. And in Maryland, they took the January 6th method, right? Which is to criminalize people who dare to question elections. They don't want you to do it. And in Maryland, they followed the left-wing way of trying to put you in jail if you wanted to raise questions about elections and use government data to raise questions about election. Integrity. And as I talked about last week in Utah, they've got restrictions on voter list use, and it's a Republican-controlled state. And we sent a letter, you better open this material up, otherwise we may sue. So it's Democrats, Republicans that sometimes restrict access to information that voters should have access to. I mean, it's not, we talk about our election integrity work, our election law work, our election for clean, the clean and honest elections, you name it. Maybe it's voters first work, right? Voters first. Voters have a right to expect fair and clean elections and processes that guard that. And when you constrain them from asking questions about it, you know something's up. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.